Hey friends, let me give you a heads up. Today's talk is part of a unique teaching series. Rather than telling you what John the Apostle wrote about Jesus in his famous biography about his life, I'm going to tell you the stories that John saw in character as John. So lean in, fire up that imagination, and let me paint a picture of Jesus of Nazareth through a lens that you've never looked through before.
Surprises are nice, but personally, I prefer routines. There's something so comforting about a familiar routine, and it gives you a sense of, normalcy when life can be anything but normal at times. As a fisherman, a routine was just an integral part of my life. We did things the same way every day. We did things the same way Dad did them. Dad did things the same way his dad did them. And when you do things the same way, you tend to get the same results every day. Wake up, check the nets, make sure the rigging is good on the ship, make sure the crew is ready to go, make sure that you brought some food to eat while you're out. Get in the boat, go to the same general regions, the same general depths, the same rotation of locations on the Sea of Galilee. You'd throw your nets in the same way. You'd draw them up in the same way. You'd come to shore and sort the fish in the same way. You'd mend the nets and sell the fish in the same way. And when you did the same thing the same way, you could predict the same results. And it was really important to us because having the same results meant that we get to keep paying taxes and not get thrown out of our house. Made sure that we had enough to eat. Having a routine, having a formula of things that you do to get a result is really important. And yes, I know that our formulas were not quite as advanced. The Greeks in my time had recently discovered all kinds of mathematical formulas that maybe you learned in school. Archimedes and Euclid and Aristotle and all of these guys. And they had their fancy formulas. We had a fisherman's formula. And it worked. It consistently produced results. And the important thing beyond just having the fish for the day is we lived in a time where we were very much not in control. The Romans were in control of everything. And whatever they didn't control, our own Jewish governors or tax collectors were in control. As a fisherman, I had control over very little. But if I could predict what would happen, A plus B equals C, that gave me a sense of control in life. And I loved having that. It was something that I had to let go of when I started following Jesus, because Jesus took the whole idea of predictability and blew his nose in it and threw it out the window. He wasn't predictable at all. So many times we would be following and he would just do things that surprise us. We just got used to surprises. I remember one time we were leaving Jerusalem. We'd been in there for another one of the many feasts. We were on our way out of town. And we heard in the distance a beggar. You say, you heard a beggar? Yes, because he was shouting very loudly, "Coins for the poor! A few spare coins for the poor! Coins for a blind man! I was born blind! Have mercy! Coins for the poor." If you went through Jerusalem, you were used to those kinds of things. You heard that a lot. There were a lot of people hard on money. There were a lot of people who couldn't work. I suspect there were some people who probably could work and had just kind of given up trying, and you never know until you get up there, and lots of people begging for money. But this guy kept saying, in a distance we heard him, he kept saying, I was born blind, have mercy. And that did require some mercy. In my day, blindness was not that uncommon. We didn't have contact lenses or glasses like you do. Sometimes your vision just kind of gets worse and worse until you can't really see. But someone who was born that way, well, that was different. See, some of our Jewish rabbis had taught us that when someone was born with a disability, it was the judgment of God on their life. It meant that either their parents had been living in sin and this was God's punishment, or there was a belief that you could sin while in the womb and that God had punished someone for sinning while still in the womb and had given them that birth defect. And so as we're getting closer to the sound of the shouting, a couple of the other guys and I were discussing this because this had come up recently. We saw lots of sick people. We saw lots of lame and injured and all manner of people. And we had been talking about this, a couple of us guys, and they're like, okay, what about born blind? Thomas says, okay, what about that? Whose fault is that? And we're discussing it as Jesus is up at the front, and somebody says, well, you ought to ask Jesus. And see, there's always this dynamic where I want to know, but I don't want to be the guy that asks a stupid question to Jesus. And none of us wanted to ask him. You ask him, you ask him. And finally they said, well, John, you're the favorite. You ask him. I said, I'm not the favorite. I was the favorite. I'm not the favorite. Don't make me do it. Everybody knows he liked me best. I said it a lot in my book. It's fine. I'll ask him. So I go up to the front. We're close to this man. And I said, Jesus, can I ask you a question? Sure. This man who was born blind, was it his parents that sinned, or was he the one who sinned? Whose fault is it that he's born blind, that God punished him this way? And Jesus said, neither. Okay, well, I wasn't expecting that. We're up close, and he said, neither his parents sinned nor he sinned that this happened, but guys, come here. He gathered us all around. He said, I want you to watch, because this man's condition is an opportunity for you to see the glory of God revealed in his life. Now, when Jesus says that's the guy who turns water into wine, the guy who tells demons to go and they run in terror, the guy who brings crippled people and has them walking and brings dead people back to life, when he says, watch out, God's going to show his glory in somebody, I'm ready for lightning bolts. I'm ready for fireballs to come out of this man's eyes, or they're going to start glowing, or maybe he's going to float in the air. I don't know. You never know with Jesus. I'm ready for the show. So we all kind of lean in and we're really intrigued. What is he going to do with this guy who was born blind? And he introduces himself. I don't remember exactly what he said, peace to you and to you as well. My name is Jesus. What's your problem? What's going on in your life? And they're talking a little bit. And this guy's asking for money, and Jesus, hey, look, I don't have money to give you, but how about I give you something better? Okay. And he gets ready to do the miracle, and then as I watch, Jesus sort of kneels down and goes, and he spits in the dirt. Now, I don't have as much, so I'm just going to get a little help this morning. He spits in the dirt, and he starts mixing up. Can you see that? Okay. He starts making a mud pie or paste or something in the mud. Now, this guy is just asking for help. And Jesus, I believe, is going to help. And he said, guys, watch, I'm going to do something amazing. And you're going to see the glory of God revealed in this guy's life. And then he's making mud. Well, this does make pretty good mud. You guys have good soil here. Okay. So he starts making this mud, and he kneels down next to the guy, and I'll kneel, and hopefully you can still see me. He kneels down next to the guy, and he says, okay, hold still. This is going to feel a little weird. And he takes this mud, and he smears it all over his eyes. Let me pat that in, and pat, smear, pat, all over his eyes. And now I have muddy fingers. And Jesus takes this mud paste, he smears it over his eyes, and then he stands up and he says, okay, go to the pool of Siloam, which is, if you were here the other day, I told you about the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem. This was the other large pool for ritual cleansing in Jerusalem. He said, go find the pool of Siloam and dip yourself in the water. And then he says, okay, guys, let's go. And we just walked along. And I thought, that's it? He's still blind. He's still blind. When we went to the man who was crippled at the pool of Bethesda, he said, get up and walk. And the man goes, ah, and he starts shaking. And then right away, I could see the answer. And he walked away. When Jesus turned the water into wine, he said, dip some out. And as soon as they responded to what he said, the water became wine. But here's a guy that Jesus wipes mud on his eyes and he says, go. And that was the end. That was it. It was really weird. And I should have known in the moment, and when I look back, it's, oh, you dummy, of course. It's always a little bit weird when you follow Jesus. It's a little unpredictable. Jesus, I think, just enjoyed doing things differently sometimes. See, he healed so many different people, but he did it in so many different ways. I remember several times Jesus would heal people by touching them. He'd put their hands on their ears and they could hear. He'd put their hand on their head and they could stand. And so people got this idea and it started going around. If you need Jesus to heal you, he has to touch you. So people would push through the crowd just so that they could get him to physically touch them. There was once a woman who needed healing and she was so convinced she had to physically touch him. She pushed through a crowd even though she was unclean. She pushed through a crowd just to try to touch Jesus. She only touched his clothes, but she was healed. So then Jesus changed it up. And sometimes without even touching people, Jesus would just speak like the man who was crippled on the mat. He never touched him. He just said, get up. And he was healed. Sometimes he did it by touching. Sometimes he did it by not touching. Sometimes people would say, Jesus, come with me. My son is sick. And Jesus would walk through town to their house. Sometimes people said, Jesus, come with me. And he said, nah, you're good. I healed him from here. Remote control. I don't know. It worked. Sometimes Jesus would walk past all of the important people to someone who was overlooked and poor and healed him. Sometimes Jesus healed the very important people. Sometimes he would say, look, I'm only here to talk to the Jews. Then other times I see him talking to a Samaritan woman or healing a Roman centurion's son. I hated the Romans. Okay, I had a problem with that. It took me a little while. Sometimes he healed Jews. One time he healed a Palestinian woman. She came and said, help. And he said, no, I'm here for the Jews. And she said, but please. And she wore him down. He said, okay, healed. Sometimes he healed in public. Once he brought somebody in front of the whole synagogue and healed a crippled hand in front of all of his critics. Other times, someone needed healing. He said, come over here to the side with me. And they'd go where nobody else could see. And he would heal them quietly and then say, do not tell anyone what I did. You never knew with him. It was completely unpredictable. And part of the reason that I wrote down the mud pie story. Oh, by the way, that's reminded me. That wasn't the only time he used spit to heal people. Okay, I don't know why. Spit. Sometimes it was a thing. One time this guy came and he couldn't speak or hear. And Jesus went, and he put spit. I promise you, I watched it with my own eyes. Spit on his finger, stuck him in the guy's ears. Like what you do to your sister to annoy her. And then he went, and he put it on his tongue, which is very gross. I don't know why, but that was it. You never knew with Jesus. And when this happened with the mud paste on the eyes, it reminded me of something. And it wasn't until later in life when I was looking back at all of my memories that the Holy Spirit brought this to mind and said, write that down. And I did. Because it was in that moment where it really clicked for me that he intentionally did it differently. There was no formula. I think he was anti-formula. And you should write this down as a takeaway from this idea, if you have the ability to. When you need God's help, don't focus on the formula, focus on the constant. Don't focus on the formula. I love routine. I love predictability. I love knowing I could produce a result by what I do in the right steps. It doesn't work with Jesus. He pushed back against that. See, here's what I noticed. Sometimes it was by touching, sometimes it was not. Sometimes it was speaking, sometimes it was up close, sometimes it was far away. Sometimes it was because the sick person had faith and Jesus said, your faith has made you well. Sometimes it was because their mom had faith and he said, your faith has made her well. Sometimes he didn't even, it was friends. One time a group of friends came and tore a hole in somebody's roof to drop them in front of Jesus. He had no faith, but their friends did. Sometimes he healed and he never uttered the word faith. And when I look at all of these examples, here's what I noticed. Everything else changes except one thing. There's only one constant with all of Jesus' miracles. Jesus. That's the constant. That's the one thing that's similar every single time. Jesus saw and Jesus had compassion and Jesus has the ability because he's God on earth. Jesus is the constant. See, you can write this down. A formula is about what to do and about how to do it. But the real point in all of these miracles was always who. That was the thing that never changed. Whether it was a Jewish nobleman or a beggar or a Samaritan lady, that was the thing that was always the same as Jesus. And when he did these things, when he performed these miracles, it was always pointing to who. So don't focus on the formula, focus on the constant. And here's what I see when I consider that the point of all of these is who. And here's something else you should write down, that God's intervention is a sign that points to his character. When he steps in and does something that we can't do, when he steps in and opens the mouth of someone who can't speak, when he wipes mud on somebody's eyes and said, go wash in the pool and you'll see. When he does those things, it's, yes, he's meeting a need and yes, he has compassion, but the real point of it was to provide a sign that points to his character. So I mentioned before that when I wrote my account of Jesus' life, there were already a few different written records of Jesus, the Gospels. Peter had been going to different places and he taught people and he had this whole verbal gospel that he would present. And Mark wrote it down and started distributing it in written form. And then Matthew added some other memories and spread that. And Luke added some other things and spread that. Those were already out there. And when I wrote mine, I wanted to give a different perspective because so much good. But sometimes you need another side of the story. And so what Peter had said, when he had said this, when Mark translated that into Greek, and Matthew and Luke kind of piggybacked off of Mark's translation, he chose for every miracle that Jesus did, he chose the word dynamin, and it means power. It means a mighty work. And let me tell you, when you see someone who's never walked before get up and walk, that's power. When you see somebody and the girl is clearly dead and Jesus says, oh, she's just sleeping. So that when we get in there, he's like, yeah, she's clearly dead. And she wakes up. That's power. It's not the wrong word. But I chose a different word in my book for miracles. It's the Greek word semeion. Now you understand, I knew enough Greek. You couldn't do business in my day without speaking a little bit of Greek. I was never fantastic at it. It was second language for me. But I wanted to pick a specific thing. And this word in Greek, semeion, and maybe you write that down, it means something that authenticates or points toward someone. The closest word in your language is a sign. And when Jesus did miracles, I said, yeah, it's semeion. It's a sign. It's something that points to him and says, he's the guy. There were Roman officers, there were Roman soldiers, and then there were the Roman officers. And you could tell because they had different uniforms. And the uniform that they wore, this outfit that they had on means if I see him from across the field, I know he's not a regular guy. I know there's something different about him. Semeion. It's a sign. It authenticates. We used to roll up scrolls, and if you would deliver it to someone, you would seal it. You would put some fresh wax on the scroll, and then there was a signet ring that was unique to you, and you would push the ring into the wax. And as the wax would cool, it would have your mark on it. And that mark signifies this is authentic and it's from the writer. Say Mayon. When a new tax collector comes into town and he says, okay, everybody, I'm the new guy. Pay your taxes to me and I'll make sure they get back to Rome. The only reason that guy doesn't get stoned on the spot is because he has a paper from Rome saying he is the tax collector. Say Mayon. It's a sign. It authenticates who he is. And every time that Jesus did these things, when I wrote about him, it wasn't just power. I said, it's a sign. It authenticates who he is. Even if it's making mud pies in the ground. Let me go back to the story of this man, because we walked away and that was the end of the day for us. We were staying at a friend's house just outside of town. The next morning, knock, knock, knock on the door. We go to open it, and it's one of Jesus's followers who was a religious leader in Jerusalem. See, not all of the influential people were against him. There were a few who had to be very secretive about it, because if it came out that you believed Jesus was the Messiah, they would kick you out. You couldn't do business with Jews anymore. You were excluded from the sacrifice. You were treated like a Gentile if you said Jesus is the Savior. These guys had to do it in secret. Well, one of them came to us and he said, Jesus, did you put mud on a guy's eyes yesterday and tell him to wash in the pool? Jesus said, yeah, I did. He said, whew, boy, you made a real mess, didn't you? He said, tell me about it. So he sat down and he told us what happened to this man. See, this guy, he wandered toward Siloam and he got there and he dipped in the pool. And when he came out of the pool, not only was the mud off of his eyes, but he could see for the first time in his life. And people around noticed. And buzz came around, and hours later, there was an emergency council of leaders in Jerusalem. And they said, look, this guy's going around saying that a miracle was done, and he was saying Jesus of Nazareth did it. We need to get on top of this right now. We don't like this guy. So they brought the man in for questioning, and they said, how is it that you can see? And the man said, the man they called Jesus put some mud on my eyes. He told me to wash in the pool. When I came out of the pool, I could see. It's amazing. And so, because my friend here, and we had a few of them, Nicodemus and Joseph and some of the other guys, okay? My friend told us, he said, they pulled back, the leaders pulled back, and they were arguing amongst themselves. That's not the guy. It just looks like him. No, it is the guy. I've seen him so many times. Coins for the poor, born blind. It's the same voice. They were arguing. They said, were you really blind? I said, yeah. He said, this Jesus guy must be a prophet. Only a prophet could have done something miraculous like that. And they got frustrated. So they sent the man away and they brought in his parents. And they said, tell us the truth. Was he actually born blind? Because you have to understand, up until that point, even following Jesus, no one in recorded history had ever been cured who was born blind. Never. It just didn't happen. They asked his parents, is he really born blind? And they said, yeah, that's our son. He was born blind. And they said, well, how was he healed? And they said, not our problem. Don't kick us out. Ask him. He's a grown man. We have no quarrel with you. We don't have no comment on Jesus. Let us go. They brought the man back in a second time and said, okay, and this is interesting. The Pharisees, the ones who were teaching all of Israel about who God is, they brought the man back in and they said, now listen, you tell us the truth. We know, they said, we know Jesus is a sinner. And God doesn't listen to sinners, so tell us who actually healed you. And he said, were you not listening? I already told you. It was Jesus. And I don't know anything about him, but the blind man said, here's what I do know. I used to be blind, and now I can see. That's all I need to know about this guy. And they got so frustrated with the man, they threw him out of the synagogue. They exiled him. He can't hang out with us anymore. Don't do business with this guy anymore. And Jesus talked to this guy who came to us, and he said, "Where's the man now?" "Well, I can take you there." So we walked. We went to where the man was staying. And Jesus talked to the guy, and he said, "Hey, I heard about what happened. I'm so glad that you can see." Jesus said, "Do you believe in the Savior, the Messiah? The Son of Man" was the title that he used. And the guy who used to be blind said, "I do. If you show me where he is, I believe." And Jesus said, "You're looking at him." And immediately the man fell to his knees and worshiped. Because the miracle wasn't just a power, it was a sign. Say Mayon, it was a sign. And he said, "I know you are who you say you are." And he had faith. And as he's worshiping Jesus, Jesus said something that was cryptic in the moment, but later I remembered it and I understood it. Jesus turned to us who were all there with him, and there were some other observers nearby. And Jesus said, "I came into the world so that the blind could be given their sight, and that those who think they can see would be blind." I said, "Did you swap? Is somebody else blind now because you transported blindness? Is that what the mud is? Who's blind now, Jesus?" "Not literally blind." I was so... Okay. Took us a while to get it. But what I realized was that a sign, and write this down, a sign won't help you if you don't follow it. Here was a guy who had no formal training. If you're blind, you do not go to synagogue and learn like the other boys. He had only a basic understanding of who God is. He knew almost nothing. But he knew enough to say, "I was blind and now I can see." And the thing that made that happen wasn't mud, it was Jesus. And I believe in him. And the people who know better, the people who know what a miracle it was, when they heard about it, see, I failed to mention this earlier, when Jesus did this miracle, it was on the Sabbath. And people were really uptight about the Sabbath. You may not realize, when we got overrun, my ancestors, when we got overrun by the Babylonians and carried off into captivity, do you know what the thing is that God most spoke to the nation by the prophet Ezekiel? Do you know the thing that he most cited when he said, "Here's why you lost the land"? Because you didn't respect the Sabbath. Did you realize that? There was a lot of reasons. We were greedy. We were violent. We were sexually immoral. But the most common thing God said is, "You didn't respect the Sabbath. You treated it as any other day. You're out." Those guys were very specific about the Sabbath. They said, "Well, putting mud on somebody's eyes kind of feels like work. And if you do that, there's no way this can be a good man." And they had such a narrow view of what a miracle should look like, that when a powerful sign happened, they didn't see it. They rejected it. And a sign from God intervening in your life, won't help you if you don't follow it. If you already have decided, here's what his help looks like, you won't see it. It was amazing how many learned people never came to faith and how many simple people did, because they didn't have preconceptions. Some of you have prayed things to God and been frustrated when he doesn't answer. Maybe you've asked God, "God, give me a promotion. Give me favor with my employer. I'm barely making enough. And I know that there's more to be made. If you will give me a promotion, Lord, if you will give me favor so that I may manage instead of working." But what if, instead of giving a promotion, what if God chooses to bless you with time with your family? What if he chooses to bless you by giving you a sense of enough when you make less and more time with the people you love? If you've already decided what his answer should be, you won't see it. "God, give me a husband. I'm so lonely. God, give me a husband. I know some of these men are knuckleheads. Bring me a non-knucklehead husband, Lord." Pray that, pray that, pray that. What if God's design for you is, what if he wants to give you peace with singleness and enrich your life with friends who make you feel complete and handle your loneliness. Jesus said some will marry and some won't, and everyone should come to peace with that. But if you've never considered God may answer you in a different way, you'll never receive what the gift is that He's trying to give you. There's so many different ways when we have what we want, and if I have a narrow view that says the formula says, if I do this and I do this and I do this, God says yes. If that happens, we're not going to see the sign, we're going to miss it. See, this happens especially to people who have a history with God. There are many times when we say, God, the last time I needed your help, I prayed this way, and I came to the church, and I talked to the pastor, and these people prayed, and you answered. So I'm going to do it exactly the same way so I get the answer again, except sometimes He doesn't do it that way. Because the point is not the formula, the point is the person. Sometimes God did something for someone else, and you said, God, when my brother needed a job, he prayed and he fasted for 3 days, and then you said yes, and I prayed and I fasted, I prayed and I fasted. You didn't give me the job. And we become disenchanted with God because He's not answering. Is it possible that God has been with you and has been answering, but if your view is so narrow when you say, no, the formula says this, I already know how He's going to do it, I already know what to expect. The nation of Israel was thirsty in the wilderness. One time God told Moses, strike the rock and water will come out. The next time God told Moses, speak to the rock and the water will come out. Why? Because He wanted him to listen. Because it's not about a formula. Can I tell you how disheartening it was to me as a young Jew, as someone who loved God and who have actually paid attention when I went to synagogue with my parents and when they read the scriptures, when they read the law, and I listened and I tried my best. Can I tell you how disheartening it was to see the wisest and the smartest among us blind to God on earth in front of them? If they can't see, what hope is there for us? But they had such a fixed idea of what God would be and how God would answer. And a man who had been born blind, his whole life changed, but they said, well, it happened on the Sabbath. Making mud sounds like work. You must be a sinner. There's so many times when God is involved in your life. And I want to tell you, for some who have said, where is God? I don't see Him. It is entirely possible, my friend, that God has been with you for quite some time, but you are looking in such a narrow point, and He's trying to get you to broaden out and say, I've been here, I've been helping you, I've been doing things you don't even realize. So many times there are gifts that we never receive because we're not looking for them, because we have too narrow a view. Don't be that way. Don't put your faith in a formula. Put your faith in the person. Because every time God is helping in your life, the point of that is to draw your eyes toward Him, to give you spiritual sight so that you can see He is who He says He is, and He is good, and He is at work in your life, whether you realize it or not. And I don't want you to be one who thinks they have sight and turns out being blind. So open those eyes to look for His help, however that comes to you.
Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.